All right, let's get right into it. We're going to unpack a really fascinating story today about a company, Medicraft, that ran into a huge crisis. And what caused it? The one thing every business dreams of, just massive runaway success. This is their story, and the blueprint they built to turn things around.
It's a wild question, right? But it happens more than you'd think. When a company grows too fast, it can put so much pressure on its foundations that every single little crack starts to show. And if you're not careful, the whole thing can just collapse. And that's pretty much the situation Medicraft found itself in. As a medical supply company, you can imagine what happened after COVID. Demand just went through the roof, but their internal systems, they just couldn't handle it. The very thing that should have been their greatest victory was suddenly threatening to sink the entire company. So let's start by digging into these growing pains. We're going to see exactly how this boom in business acted like a spotlight, revealing some pretty serious weaknesses hiding inside the company. So the first problem they ran into, well, it's a classic business dilemma. It comes down to a choice between two suppliers, and it really asks that critical question. Do you save a little bit of money right now, or do you invest in something that's going to save you a whole lot of trouble later on? Okay, check out these numbers because this is where it gets really interesting. At first glance, you'd think supplier 1 is the obvious choice, $1 per unit versus $1.30. Cheaper, right? But hold on. Because supplier 2's product is higher quality, Medicraft can actually charge more for it, $2 instead of $1.50. That means their contribution margin is way better. And this is the key, their break-even revenue is lower. They literally have to sell less just to start making a profit. And this right here perfectly sums up their decision. You see, choosing the more expensive supplier wasn't just about the math. No, it was a strategic move. It was about protecting their best, most loyal customers. The hospitals and clinics who absolutely rely on quality and are willing to pay for it. So they made this smart call on quality. But the next problem was even bigger, a real systemic risk. Their entire supply chain was dependent on just one source. You know the saying, they had all their masks in one basket. So now we've got to talk about de-risking the whole operation. So here's the plan. Bring Turkey into the mix as a second supplier. And when you compare them side by side, it's a no-brainer. Shipping from Turkey to their main market in Europe is way faster. It gives them a backup so they're not totally reliant on China. And here's a really clever part. The Turkish lira was weakening against the euro, which actually gave them a currency advantage, making their costs even lower. And this wasn't some random guess. Just look at this number. Turkey's GDP per capita shot up almost 60% in just a few years. That points to a strong, stabilizing economy, exactly what you want in a new manufacturing partner. And then you look at the average wage there. It shows that, even with that economic growth, Turkey is still a really competitive place to produce goods, especially when you factor in those shorter shipping times to Europe. Okay, so we've talked about quality, we've talked about supply chain risk, but honestly, both of those things were just symptoms. The real underlying problem, the chaos at the heart of everything, was happening in the warehouse. And this all comes down to a little something called inventory management. Now, that sounds fancy, but all it really means is knowing what you have, where it is, and how much you need. It sounds so basic, right? But if you don't get it right, everything else just completely falls apart. And this slide, wow, this shows just how bad it was at Medicraft. Their entire inventory system was run on Excel spreadsheets. That means they had no idea what they had in stock in real time. Their physical counts were always wrong. And this is the real killer. They were accepting purchase orders from huge customers without actually knowing if they had the product to send them. Just imagine the chaos. And the consequences of that are just brutal. First, you get overstock. You're tying up all your cash in products that might just expire on a shelf. Second, and maybe even worse, you get stockouts. That means delays, angry customers, and eventually those customers are just going to go to your competitor. And all of that puts an absolutely crushing pressure on your cash flow and your profits. So it sounds pretty dire, I know, but there is a way out of the mess. Now we get to the good part, the actual blueprint for the fix. The plan is to go from the absolute chaos of manual spreadsheets to a controlled, automated system that can actually handle their growth. And the specific recommendation is a software called Zoho Inventory. And here's why it's pretty much the perfect solution for them. 1, it gives them automated, real-time stock tracking. That visibility problem? Solved. 2, it can handle multiple warehouses, which is exactly what they need as they expand with their new supplier. And 3, it's affordable and it can scale up as the company gets bigger. So let's bring this all home. Here it is, the complete, 5-point turnaround plan. First, stick with the quality supplier. Second, use that quality to negotiate better costs. 3, diversify your supply chain by bringing Turkey online. 4, and this is a big one, admit that the old Excel system is a massive liability. And finally, 5, implement a real system like Zoho to get control and finally be ready for growth.
It's a solid plan. It's clear, it's powerful, and it tackles every single one of their weaknesses head on. But it leaves us with one last really important question. Medicraft has the perfect blueprint now. But as anyone in business will tell you, having a great plan is one thing. Actually, pulling it off is something else entirely. So, is a good plan ever really enough?